Hello everybody, welcome to topic week 2. No, week 3 now actually. God, we're motoring along. So the first week you looked at what engineers actually did. Last week we looked at George Stephenson, who was actually an engineer. And what we're going to do this week is we are going to look at why he was so significant and what his invention of the steam railway actually did for the people in Victorian times. So we're going to think about how important the railways were. So we're going to think about how people got around in Victorian times, what did people do for fun, and then we're going to have a look at the seaside and what we can do there. And there's another video actually that I'm going to ask you to watch halfway through this video, so it's going to be a case of pausing, stopping, and then coming back to this one. So, what was it like in Victorian times? Okay, so how do you think, so if you've got a grown-up with you, now is the time to talk to them, even if you don't want to. How do you think they got around in Victorian times? What kind of transport did they have? So you're looking at 200 years ago. What do you think they had? Okay, so pause the video and come back to me when you've had your discussion. Pause the video now. Okay, hopefully you've had some good discussion with a grown-up. Here are some of the things that did not exist in Victorian times. They didn't have cars. They didn't have boats, or at least they didn't have boats that looked like that anyway. They didn't have aeroplanes of any kind, and they didn't have motorbikes. Okay, so if they didn't have any of those things, how do you think they got around? Well, they got around using these. Okay, so here we have a very simple horse and cart. Okay, if you had a little bit more money, you might have had a carriage. Okay, this, funnily enough, is a bicycle. Okay, it's called the penny farthing, and it was one of the first bicycles they ever had. That's what they used to look like. Imagine riding one of those now, you'd look very silly. And if you couldn't afford any of those, you had your trusty boots. Most people walked places. Okay, so if most people walked or used these funny bikes, what do you think people actually did in those times? What do you think? And that's what we're going to think about next. Okay, so what do you think people did for fun? Pause, have a conversation with your parents, go. Right, now you've had a chat with your mums, dads, sisters, brothers. Here are some of the things that did not, you definitely couldn't have done in Victorian times. There were no toys. Let's get rid of that one. No toys like that at all. No toys like our Paw Patrol tower or maybe some of the dolls that you have these days. There was no television. I know, shocking as it may seem, there was no television in Victorian times. There was no going on wonderful seaside holidays abroad because they didn't have planes. There were no games consoles of any kind. And actually, there was no internet. Now, to be fair, there wasn't even internet when I was your age. But there was no mobile phones, no laptops, no computers, no internet. You couldn't just look on Google for things or YouTube or anything like this. So what did people actually do for fun? Would you have liked to have lived in a time where there were no toys, televisions, lavish, wonderful holidays, internet and games consoles? You probably think no. But people in Victorian times didn't have a choice. So these are some of the things that people did. They played games, simple games like Ring a Ring of Roses in the playground or in fields or in the street. This is very simple. This was a stick and a hoop, and it was a case of could you keep the hoop going all the way down the street? And this is what they would have worn in those times. Checkers or chess or drafts. They would have played that, board games. Or they might have just had parties. Now, unfortunately, apart from maybe the Ring of Roses game and the ball and the stick and the hoop, the people in these photos, or in this painting here and this painting here, they had money. They were considered rich. They were the ones that had lots and lots of money. You probably would have worked for one of these people. They would have been the only people who would have got an education. They would have been the only people who could learn to read and write, which is why George Stephenson couldn't read and write until he was 18 when he taught himself, because he didn't have a rich mum or dad. His dad was a coal miner and so was he. So if you didn't have any money, if you worked in a factory or worked down a coal mine or worked and worked, you wouldn't have been able to go to parties. You wouldn't have been able to sit in your dining room or drawing room and playing games. You would have been out on the streets, or you would have just been working as much as you possibly could to get as much money as you could. So what does George Stephenson have to do with all of this? Okay, well, his invention of the steam train, that allowed people to start to travel. Even those people who worked in factories, because the steam train was so cheap and so many people could get on it at a time. They didn't have seats like they do today. The working class people, the people that worked in the factories and on the farms and down the mines, they were able to travel. And where did they want to go? Well, the seaside. Okay, so here, this is what they would have travelled on. This was the steam train. That George Stephenson was, he invented and he made and he developed with the help of others. And this is where they went. This is what the Victorian seaside would have looked like. Now, it looks a little bit different to ours. Okay, I wonder what these things here are on wheels and what people are wearing. So what I want you to actually do now is I want you to stop the video. And I want you to go onto the YouTube channel or just YouTube and type in Magic Grandad Seaside. Now I have uploaded the video to my YouTube channel. I want you to watch it. It's all about some children who has a granddad who is magic, and he can go back in time to different places, and he takes his grandchildren back to the Victorian seaside. And I want you to have a look at some of the things that they do in the video. You might get some answers as to what's in the picture down the bottom, but what else do they do as well? Now, there are other things as well which we can talk about, but I just want you to watch what is different about the seaside in Victorian times. There's quite a few differences in the video. So stop this video now, watch the Magic Grandad, and then come back to this point in the video of this one, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you could see. So stop now. Okay, you've stopped the video, you've watched the Magic Grandad, hopefully. It's really important that you do, because otherwise you're not going to be able to do today's activity really, really well. So, I've just used some pictures of some of the things that they did. Now, you would have noticed in the video that they had these changing rooms, these changing booths, where people would have got changed into their swimming costumes in. Okay, they were put right by the water so that you could just jump straight, or you could get straight into the water. But people had to pay for them. They weren't free. They were expensive to use, which was a little bit difficult for the people that didn't have very much money. And this is what they used to wear, their swimming costume. There was a lady in the video who was tutting at two people walking along the beach because they could see their legs. Now, it wasn't good for ladies and some men as well to show flesh in those days. These were their swimming costumes. Their swimming costumes had to cover their entire body, and even some of them had hats on, things to protect their hair as well. You couldn't show arms, or you couldn't show your belly button or anything like that in those days. You had to be completely and utterly covered up. Here we've got some children playing in the sand with some buckets and spades. You saw those in the video as well. So we still have buckets and spades now, but they were made of metal back then, because it didn't have plastic in Victorian times. Plastic is a man-made material. They didn't have plastic back then. So they had possibly the wooden spades or metal spades, and then a metal bucket as well. But they still made sandcastles just like we did today. You could have gone on a donkey ride. Now, there's not that many beaches around now that offer donkey rides, maybe some of the bigger ones, but you could have gone on a donkey ride. And probably the biggest attraction, and you can see it just here in the video, is Punch and Judy. Okay, so it's a bit like a puppet show. And everybody used to watch them. So it didn't matter if you were a child or an adult, everybody here is stood around here looking at the Punch and Judy show here. Okay, you would have been able to have got sweets. Later on in the Victorian times, they started to do, kind of ice. It wasn't ice cream in those days. It was like flavoured ice, and it had been like crushed up ice in a cup that was flavoured. But they didn't have anything like ice cream in those days. Not until later on did they have ice creams. Now, in that video, you had to pay to sit down. There was a lady who was sat down on the bench, and she had to pay 1 penny, and she got up because she didn't want to pay it. Imagine going to the beach now and sitting on the beach and being charged £1 or a penny to go and sit on the beach. It's crazy, but that's what they used to do. And this is why this picture is so important, because it's so busy. Because this is where people went. People went to the seaside because it was an escape from their boring, their hard lives that they had in the factories and down the mines, and they wanted some excitement. And they couldn't have this excitement if it wasn't for the railway. The railway gave them the option of this, especially if you were living in big industrial towns like Manchester and Birmingham, where there's no seaside anywhere near you. It allowed people to do this. So, what's your activity for today? So I want you've got some A3 paper in your book. I want you to come up with a really awesome poster advertising the beach. Imagine you work at the beach. You want people to come to the beach so that they can have fun and do all of those things at the beach. And I want you to create a poster for it. So that poster has to have a really big, nice title. So I've got Come to the Beach Today. You don't need that title. You could call yours Chesil Beach, or Corfe Beach, or Kimmeridge Beach, or whatever you wanted to, as long as it had a really big, colourful title. Now, I couldn't make my writing multicoloured, but if you can make it multicoloured, then that would be brilliant. Okay? It needs some big, clear pictures. Think about the things that you saw in that video, or the pictures. What were they doing? They were going on donkey rides. They were building sandcastles. They were watching Punch and Judy. Okay? That's what I want you to draw and to label them. And a good poster has lots of colour to it. So don't just colour everything in red or colour everything in green. Try your best to choose the right colours for the things you're doing. A sandcastle is going to be yellow. It's not going to be blue. Okay? Unless you've got blue paint in your sand. You might want some writing in there. Kind of saying the prices of something. Say it's, the train is really, really cheap. 1 penny to go to the beach. 5p to come and watch Punch and Judy. And then it might be a good idea to have a train in as well, so you know how you're going to get to the beach. And these posters would be put up all over towns. They would be put into workplaces, getting people to go to the seaside at their weekends after they finish work, anytime they possibly can, because they didn't really get holidays back then. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to it. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of these posters when you hand your work in next. Have fun. Just make sure they're the best you possibly can do it. Okay? And I look forward to seeing them later on. It's goodbye from me.